So welcome to our second panel of today. The Venice Architecture Biennale is more than an exhibition. It is architecture's testing ground. And every 2 years, it doesn't just reflect how we live, build, and imagine the future. It pushes the field to confront new ideas, challenge its limits, and reimagine its role in the world. Today, we go behind the scenes, into the curatorial choices, logistical feats, and cultural ambitions that make it such a singular and influential event. We're joined by 3 leading figures who have each shaped the Venice Architecture Biennale, and through it, the global conversation on architecture. Manuela Luca Dazio, Executive Director of the Pritzker Architecture Prize, served for nearly 2 decades at La Biennale di Venezia, where she was Deputy Director for the Visual Arts and Architecture departments from 2009 to 2019, overseeing both the art and architecture exhibitions. She's also an advisor to Her Excellency here at Qatar Museums. Alejandro Aravena, architect and partner at Do Tank Elemental and 2016 Pritzker Prize laureate. He's also the president of the jury for the Pritzker Prize since 2020. He has directed 2016 Biennale reporting from the front. And Rem Koolhaas, whom we have already introduced, but in the context of this panel, I should emphasize that he's also a 2000 Pritzker Prize laureate. He's a professor in practice of architecture and urban design at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, and has directed the 2014 Biennale Fundamentals. Welcome. So we will begin first. Manuela, we will begin first with your presentation. We have 3 presentations we would like to show you because it's a complex system, and we'll start with the history of the Biennale, and then we will present the 2 Biennales, the 2014 Fundamentals and 2016 Reporting from the Front, and then we will open the floor for questions, internal and so on.
Historically, politically, and commercially, Venice has always been a bridge between the north and south and the east and west of this part of the world. And through diplomacy, business skills, and pragmatism, Venice became quickly a vast commercial empire during all the way through the 14th century, the Serenissima Repubblica, and until the end of the Byzantine Empire, expanding its network in the whole Mediterranean and all the way to the Black Sea, and establishing its commercial relationship in a very strategic way, meaning creating Venetian communities in the main cities of the Near East, as well as welcoming permanent, let's call them embassies of those same countries in Venice. These buildings were called fondaco. Fondaco is more a hub than a warehouse, and this was part of a very strategic and efficient system that the Serenissima Repubblica elaborated in order to protect and enhance the safety, the comfort, and the efficiency, not only of the goods, but also of the travelers. And 3 are the main examples of these buildings on the Grand Canal. I'll tell you why they're so meaningful in a second. Fondaco dei Turchi for the Turks. The Turks, of course, Venice was the portal, the commercial portal for the whole Byzantine Empire and the Middle East. Fondaco dei Tedeschi, that has been in recent years brought back to life thanks to an outstanding intervention by Rem. And this was for the Germans, meant as the whole North European trade, and the Persians that were trading with textiles and fabrics with Venice. This shows the importance of the balance between these global and local perspectives. And jumping ahead a few centuries later, the Venice Biennale was established precisely in this very spirit, to create, to found a totally international platform for the arts and for cultural dialogue, but very rooted in the very spirit of the city of Venice. And the balance between these two dimensions, global and local, ended up, and according to three main parameters that are the cultural, the touristic, and the logistic infrastructure, ended up by attracting a lot of private and public institutions to establish in Venice around the Biennale. So in a way, we can say that the contemporary Fondaco, from a cultural point of view, are represented by the venues of the main foundations, cultural foundations that operate in Venice. You have Fondazione Prada that is using Ca' Cornel della Regina, the former house of the former palazzo of the former Queen of Cyprus, the Pinot Connection in the former Custom of Venice, and Palazzo Grassi, the Berggruen Arts and Culture Foundation in Palazzo Dietro. The Venice Biennale, since the beginning, so was established around as an international stage, a special vantage point to look at the changes in the world and in the society, as well as a platform for all the arts. And so inevitably this dimension that was precisely to host and to stage the avant-garde and artistic tendencies in all disciplines started in 1895 with the first international art exhibition and evolved inevitably to include more disciplines and in music, cinema, theater, architecture since 1980, and dance. And how to establish the identity, how to affirm a new cultural institution in the city of Venice. This happened through architecture. The first sign that a new institution was born was a pavilion. And we will see why pavilions are so important for the history and for the present of the Venice Biennale. This was the construction site of the central pavilion in its different stages in the Giardini di Castello that were created by Napoleon a few decades before. And progressively, the Venice Biennale has expanded towards the Arsenale venue, the historical naval area, restoring, and this through an ongoing restoration process that is still happening today, progressively restoring the main buildings, starting in the 1980 with the architecture exhibition, and by Paolo Portoghesi, and continuing to the present date. And this basically to create more space, more venues for the curators, for the artists, and for the national pavilions that were progressively expanding. The pavilions, we will see, are a fundamental part of the Venice Biennale. In the very first edition in 1895, artists from 15 countries were hosted in the central pavilion. There was the only one existing building. And the success was such that very soon the countries, the individual governments started to ask to have their own space, their own pavilions. Belgium was the first one to open in 1907, followed by Hungary, Bavaria, meaning now Germany, UK, France, Russia, and so on and so forth, all the way to the last one, at the Giardini, that is the Qatar pavilion, and we'll talk about it in a second. The pavilions expanded, as we said, in the Arsenale and throughout the whole city of Venice, growing up to 90 countries, a record number in 2019 for art and 66 this year for architecture. This is a very meaningful trend, and as much as the overall geopolitical map of Venice and of the Venice Biennale changes year by year depending on the countries that decide to participate, there is a core group of pavilions concentrated in the Giardini and in the Arsenale that is basically a permanent, some sort of permanent geopolitical map that started as a very Eurocentric one at the foundation of the Venice Biennale and expanded progressively to include North America, South America, Asia, all the way, as I said, to Qatar as in representation at the Giardini of the Arabian Peninsula. Qatar is a special case, and let me talk about it for a minute. because this year is participating officially for the first time through a sort of two-folded presence. There is the beautiful pavilion by Yasmin Lari, a temporary one, that symbolizes the message behind this first participation that is happening in Palazzo Franchetti near San Marco, entitled Beiti Beitak. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. And then it's not simply a placeholder for the future permanent pavilion designed by Lina Gottman that you can see in the other image, but also represents the spirit of the presence of Qatar in the Venice Biennale, meaning creating a new house, a new home for the arts, for the artists, and for the visitors who will come to see it. A little bit in the same spirit of what happened with the first pavilion of the Venice Biennale. And now quickly, let me give you also a little bit of reference for both our art and architecture exhibitions. This is what I call the family portrait of the Venice Architecture Biennale. And these are all the chairmen and the curators of the different editions, starting with the first one that was in 1974, curated by Vittorio Gregotti, all the way to this year. And in colors, this is a personal reference, you can see all those presidents and curators with whom I had the luck and the privilege and the pleasure, I have to say, to work with. Basically, each edition of the architecture exhibition, as well as the art exhibition, is the result of two different but very intertwined forces in action. Meaning the vision, the cultural vision of the institution represented by the chairman, and the artistic response of the curator that changes each year. I was lucky enough to start in a moment when the Biennale was going through its last reformation, which gave me, meaning the whole office, the possibility to rethink the way that the art and architecture exhibitions were organized. I don't have a better image to explain this other than my own desk when I was working there. But around the art and architecture department that was working a little bit as a hub, as a general coordinator for both exhibitions, there are many other technical offices, legal offices, administration working on to realize the exhibition. The exhibition is organized, as I'm sure you all know, around 3 sections. The international exhibition curated by an international curator appointed by the Biennale itself. The national pavilions, which is a free and open list of all the countries who intend to participate, and the collateral events that are somehow expanding in independent ways the theme by the curator. The venues, I'm sure you're all very familiar with, but this is just to mention the dimension of the spaces that each curator is called to use and to fill with contents. And now we're going to narrow the conversation to 2 specific editions, very special and very different. I cannot imagine 2 more meaningful and different experiences, at least from my point of view, from the point of view of the institution. 2014, REM curated a unique edition of the Biennale. It was a Biennale, and Ram, I'm going to describe it from my point of view, meaning the institutional point of view. It was the first time that there were almost no participants. The participants were, in a way, the elements of architecture speaking for themselves, and the participants in the Arsenale were the different disciplines of the Biennale. It was the first time that the curator involved all the other artistic directors of the other Biennale disciplines to kind of work together and also to use together the spaces of the Mondo Italia exhibition. And also it was the first and only time so far that even the countries were conceived as one very important section through the theme of absorbing modernity. So this whole thing came up as one exhibition in a very complex process that went on for 2 years, but given the scope and the ambition and the dimension of the project, it was not even too long. On the other hand, Alejandro was called to curate the Biennale for the first time It was his first experience. And it was, in a way, the opposite. It was a very experimental biennale also for us who had to work on it. He left, it was called Reporting from the Front, and he intentionally left all the national participations as open front, open to bring and contribute with their own message. From the point of view of the office of the organizers, these were two completely different experiences. And now we're going to hear more from Rem and Alejandro's voices, and maybe I will add some comment or some gossip.
No gossip for me, but there was no time for gossip. So I will can basically tell you about our Biennale. It consisted of three elements. In a central pavilion, elements of architecture, which was deliberately looking at how each architectural element has evolved over a very long time. Not only architectural elements of Europe and the West, but elements all over the world. The third one was called Monditalia. What I wanted to explore in that one was why are incredibly gifted countries with incredible, beautiful treasures, unbelievably talented kind of people, very performing economies, unable to get the best out of their whole ingredients. And in that sense, in this case, Italy was a kind of model for Europe that is kind of struggling with the same issues. And maybe the most important part, but I'll talk about it later, was absorbing modernity, where I basically kind of figured that each national pavilion is in itself an incredible effort, consuming enormous amount of money, and that there was kind of maybe the potential to make all these countries work together and generate a collective work, a collective effort. And in order to promote that idea, we devised a theme, 100 years of modernity, that were imposed on each and every one of these countries. And so that was basically a collective experience that every country could share. What is very important about the Biennale is that typically a director gets 1 year. And I had warned the Biennale that I would only accept it if I had 2 years. Because the work of making all these separate countries create a kind of coherent presentation took a lot of personal effort and engagement, an enormous amount of time, but it turned out to be completely worth it. So, as Manuela said, the Biennale consists of two parts, the Giardini, the gardens, and the Arsenale. And this is the kind of proposal for Italy. We used a very ancient map, Poitinger map of Italy that recorded all the ingredients, even in Roman times, as a linear device. And what we were able to do is to combine the architecture Biennale, to create a model of Italy, almost a scan of Italy, where we had, I think, 25 projects that were running from North Italy to the south. And we combined that with movies. Italy is a fantastic movie country with incredible directors who typically get their inspiration from Italy itself. And therefore, we had a kind of simultaneous record of movies, architecture, and eventually also dance integrated in a single thing. Then we had in the central pavilion elements of architecture, and what I did it very deliberately because the history and the tradition of the Biennale at that point was to ask a number of well-known architects to kind of show their kind of most recent projects. and to find a kind of euphemistic term for that presentation. I wanted to really not necessarily be down to earth, but more microscopic in terms of what is the current status of architecture, embedded in what are the ingredients that architecture almost inevitably consists of. So we were looking at doors, at windows, at floors, at ceilings, and looking at their histories. This was the kind of opening element. Ceiling, and what you see, this is kind of architectural space. But this exhibition or this section wanted to show is that there is an enormous technical volume in every building that we almost never talk about, that we never show, and that is basically dedicated to a domain that we barely control. And then we didn't cover the entire space, and above it was a kind of beautiful ceiling from 1900, showing in a way the technicality that we are embracing, but also the debasement of beauty that implies. We were looked not only at the West, as I said, we translated an amazing Chinese book from the 11th century that was about construction details in Chinese architecture. And we constructed the reality of it and discovered, very interestingly, that Chinese architecture is very rigid in terms of its details, but that the rigidity was a way to avoid corruption by imposing on the whole of China the same kind of architecture. And therefore nobody could manipulate the kind of cost. So architecture is always, of course, intersecting inevitably with a number of domains. This was windows, an amazing collection of windows of all kinds of shows, and basically that kind of situation has, partly because of regulations, of course, led to incredibly regulated and tested window details that are possible today, and that again imply an enormously shrunken range of potentials. But my real ambition in the show, or purpose in the show, was to show how, again, with a lot of euphemistic language emanating from Silicon Valley in terms of intelligent, smart, blah, 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 kind of architecture in cities, there is an incredible encroachment and limitation of architectural possibilities emanating from the kind of tech and digital sector. Here were windows measuring when they can be opened and no longer dependent on individual people. Floors that record excellence, but of course, apart from excellence, they can record also everything else that is going on in an apartment. Analysis of bathrooms that kind of basically, again, removes all kinds of any kind of privacy, and even how the whole notion of fire and a fireplace, the traditional kind of center of many architectures, is kind of completely converted, in this case, by a technology that enables you not to heat an entire room, but to have sensors that can heat and warm up individuals in kind of a specific space. And maybe the most sinister thermostat that can learn. And learning means absorbing information from kind of individual owners and then kind of predicting what their future needs are. So a very ambiguous device in terms of between control, big brother, etc. And ultimately, what I was kind of what the hidden polemic in the entire effort was, that the kind of smart city is basically trying to identify necessities that are very often kind of simply invented, And for instance, in this case, this is a kind of system where you have to convert your entire city to make sure that each car has its own park and place, blah, blah, blah. And so there's no question about cars, but the question is shifted to park and places. So it was very interesting also that therefore it was a biennale where the discussion with other architects was minimal because we both all are more or less the victim of the same kind of reduction of potential, and were basically questioning tech leaders, so to speak, became a very vivid and kind of interesting thing. So I'm a very political person, and basically the mottos of the French Revolution, freedom, equality, and brotherhood, are still vivid, have a vivid meaning for me. And what I was saying is with a degree of alarm was that in the current society, these values have been shifted to comfort, security, and sustainability. Therefore, a lot less engaging, and I would also say a lot less inspiring in terms of kind of future definitions. Then the most important part of the show was this collaborative effort with all the individual countries. I think there were 80 at that point. So really a massive kind of work of collective intelligence, where each of them kind of looked at their kind of own history. Where we had, for instance, in the Korean pavilion, a subversive combination of North and South Korea, basically two countries that never speak to each other, but through architecture we were able to create a kind of collective or combined presentation. We had the presence of Iran, we had the kind of presence of Russia, and this was why I think the entire effort was worth it. A single panel, concrete prefabrication panel with a kind of single window in the pavilion of Chile that basically showed the kind of history of this idea of prefabrication, inevitably connected to socialism, inevitably connected to a political situation which has been or was developing in the kind of 60s and 70s in many countries, where technologies were imported from far-flung countries for ideological reasons, and therefore leading also to a kind of interesting ideological infiltration of those countries. So it remains to be, all this effort remained to be kind of combined in a single kind of book, which would be really a stunning collective history of the last 100 years, seen through architecture, but actually with many kind of more and very sometimes very moving and kind of radical side issues that for elements of architecture we were able to put in a book.
So I don't remember if I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement at the Biennale, maybe. But if I did, it's 10 years already. So the reason why we're still traveled so far is to be able to share the behind the scenes. So hopefully gossip, and if not, at least some confessions. Some of the behind the scenes in the Biennale. Let me start with the 3 stories here. The invitation, this very mysterious email from President Baratta saying, if you by chance are around, can you come to Venice? Not saying why. And Chile is far away, it's not that you just happen to be there. So I was able to, for some other project maybe, go to Venice. And when I arrived, he said, well, would you consider to be the curator of the Biennale following maybe the most important architect in the world. No pressure. I said, well, if this is the most important architectural event in the world, and maybe you have something to say, well, this is the most powerful loudspeaker. So, yes. I have some bad news, though, I said to the president. I've never curated anything. And well, he said, no, don't worry, that's why we have the Biennale team, and that's why we have Manuela Lucadazio, that was in the end who made things happen. We also said, okay, I also said we have a team as well. So the whole office will be working in this Biennale. Our practice is as small as possible. We're 15, and all of us were working there. 3 of them are here, Diego, Christian, and Clem. But then President said, well, I have some bad news on my side as well. You know, in order to publicly announce your appointment, who has to sign that decree is the mayor of Venice. But he is under investigation for some cases, so eventually risking going to jail. So until the situation is cleared, we cannot announce this, meaning you cannot invite people. So time began to pass by, and 9 months before the open, we were finally able to ask people to come. So when you have no experience or no time, well, I guess that's our everyday case in our practice. You have to jump into the void with just partial certainties, improvise. So it's not less is more, like Mies, is more or less something. Well, it's not the first time the whites actually do this. I mean, in social housing, we had no idea what it was back in 2000. That was the case. We're building now a tower, never done a tower before in Switzerland, or what was going to be the tallest towers in Europe, in Albania, doing a hospital for the victims of sexual violence, of the armed conflict in Colombia, never done a hospital before. That was actually the case with the art mill. When we were in the competition, we warned the jury, we have never done a museum before. So what you do is you use very rigorously your ignorance. And you ask stupid questions, that's one thing. And the second thing, you take the shortcut and partner with the people that know. That has been the case with all these other examples, and that was the case with the Biennale. Manuela was generous enough to introduce us to other curators, and they were quite generous. And you sharpened your radar for talent and for mediocrity. How do you choose who to listen to? It's very important, and it was the case with curators. So we met a couple of very, very skilled ones that were sharing their own experiences and failures. So if you're going to fail, fail fast and fail cheap. But also you identify very sharply mediocrity. The mediocre ones, there in this world, at least as an outsider, there was a lot of people just selling smoke. And you can identify mediocrity because those people tend to be bitter, negative, mean. And somehow for this kind of people, talent is not a thrill, but a threat. And so you can smell in 2 seconds in which direction to go and which of those curators to listen and which don't. So in any case, from that, we jumped into the title. First version, very embarrassing, rejected. Second one, accepted, reporting from the front. We may go if we have time for Q&A. Can you
tell us what was the original idea?
No. My lips are sealed. I'm never. Yeah. But whatever the thing is, you have to come up this. All this was happening in between. I was invited, and there was still not public. I mean, so we had to gain time. So the moment it was public, we can start running. So the graphic identity, And we have this image from this archaeologist working in the Nazca lines in Peru. That was, I mean, it's an incredible photograph that we knew from decades, at least in Chile. Because Barata said there are three things that matter for a good exhibition. First, it has to be clear. Second, you have to be consistent. And third, you have to subvert and contradict yourself a little bit. So if the title was reporting from the front, in Chile, I mean, we do have this kind of conflict background. And in general, the built environment, it's hard to achieve. I mean, you have to struggle a lot. But then, to the graphic identity for these battlefields, we had a lady in a dress with flowers doing who knows what on top of a ladder. And that lady was Maria Reiche, that if you're sitting on the ground, you just see gravel, but she understood that in order to make sense out of nonsense, with the right point of view, in this case height, you get the lines that are animals and flowers and that had meaning. And it's not that different from our world today. If we find the right point of view and we're able to share that in a biennale, what for all of us may be just stones, for some people, there's lines and drawings and representations. So the point was, can we invite people that have found a point of view like Maria that can report to us what is she seeing on top of that ladder to the rest of us that just see cows. It's very interesting, this image, because, yes, of course, she was, and this is a photograph by Bruce Chatwin. He found her in the middle of the desert walking with an aluminum ladder. Maybe she didn't have the resources to have, definitely not a plane, but even if she had for a car, that tool would have destroyed the object that she was trying to study. So it's not just a question of scarcity of means, it's also a question of pertinence. So there were many lessons to be learned from that image that we thought was pertinent for the graphic image. Well, I'll skip this. Second story, how to exhibit. We had time, it was not public yet, so we went to the end of the Art Biennale, November, and we knew one of the things we had to do was the opening room. And in the pictures Manuela showed before, this is a confession, in the opening room of the Arsenale room done by Rem, it was with Swarovski crystals and jewelry. So we asked ourselves, what can be the most opposite opening room from jewelry? Garbage and debris and waste. So we said, don't throw away whatever comes out of the demolition of the Art Biennale. We will find a way to use it and at least postpone throwing away material that every year gets built and demolished and thrown away. And so we said again, how can we use these 100 tons of gypsum board and 14 kilometers of metal studs? We use the gypsum board that broken with our knees and show the irregular part, the side of it, and begin to pile it up and asking workers that are very skilled in Italy to use it in a way. And that guy over there didn't get why we were using gypsum, and they're very skilled craftsmen, yet we were using in the most awful part of the material. But at some point he said, but with the right rhythm here, with the right voids, this looks like the travertino del popolo, the travertine of the people. So for almost no money, you can get something that had some appeal, to the point that he said, you know what, I'm going to do this at home. And at that point we knew we were using design to provide quality with a material that inherently doesn't have it. And that's the end result of it. But 2 weeks before, I remember it was 3. You said the other day, Manuela, it was 2 weeks before the opening, president of the Biennale comes to see how the exhibition is proceeding. And at that point, we realized that he had never seen anything of what we were doing. And we were writing that whatever was there to be seen was all the garbage that every single year the Biennale produces. So we were, well, that's it. I mean, who will be willing to confess that every single year there's this amount of resources wasted? So he stood there for eternal 10 seconds, and at the end he said, make sure that the size of the letter is big enough so that people can read it. So he was a former banker, but then we understood we had a real punk on our side. And this was the result of that opening room with the debris of the previous one. And finally, I'm going to skip this. Two of the projects, maybe this one. The people that we invited. We were trying to identify these battles. Battles meaning problems, challenges that matters to society, that are not specifically related to architecture. For example, insecurity, violence, or poverty, inequalities, you name it. I mean, there's a list of things that every single society will have on top of their list as something that the built environment has to address. This case was one of them, a market in Durban in an abandoned piece of highway that was never finished. It was maybe the most dangerous place in the city. I happened to go to the place, and to our surprise, when we were visiting there, the person that was running the project of transforming an abandoned highway into this market was a former policeman. And he was tired of getting people, bringing them to jail, being released the next day, and so the criminality cycle was keep on going. He said, I have to do something different here, so he started an NGO. So not even architects were the ones that could have tools and knowledge to share to other architects. In this case, it was a policeman that understood that the built environment has some clues to be able to address an issue that is relevant to society at large. So he transformed the piece of highway. On top is this kind of black magic market. Below in the covered area is a music market. A lot of people dancing. Is a transportation hub because in between the countryside and the city, that in Africa it's still like 50-50, so it's a very relevant exchange point. It's so vibrant, it's so lively, that this deserves to be shared and understand. If you other people have the same issues, how can design strategies help to overcome, in this case, insecurity and criminality? And the last one I would like to share is this. We were talking the other day with Yelena about the cultural clash. This ended up being the Golden Lion by Paraguayan architect Solano Benitez. And the point of Benitez and the way architecture or in general design can be used to address a relevant issue is that the most abundant resource in the built environment in the world is non-skilled labor. Normally, in our part of the world, which is 70% of the planet, people in the construction sector that don't know anything else of what to do, go and try to build. So you have to build with people that don't know how to build. How do you deal with unskilled labor and use design to separate final quality from the non-controlled constraints from the starting point? So he there is using, for example, this brick triangles, the most abundant material in Paraguay, to be the formwork for a single rebar, just one rebar with mortar in between. Again, the more or less 5 to 6 centimeters. And the cultural clash was that, of course, this was in the opening room, and we had to have the permission of the city to build this. So the Biennale engineer asked, to the architect, can you give me your calculation sheets so that we, for insurance and permissions and liabilities, prove that this is safe? And the architect would say, what do you mean a calculation sheet? His way of testing was he would put the bricks on the ground, pour some concrete, stand on top of it, and if it resists, it worked. So we had to come up with strategies to be able to combine this world of, let's say, set of rules that follow a complete different logic. That is actually the majority of the world. It's not regulation, it's a complete different thing. To be able to have a dialogue with the Biennale, you had to figure that out. I just presented the problem, you were bringing the solution. That nothing. I mean, I guess that the success proved, because in the end, he got the golden lion. That's our part of the stories I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all three presentations. I will start with a question for Rem. You mentioned something about being political, and I also wanted to ask you what motivated you to shift away from celebrating contemporary architecture and to revisit the building blocks and histories of the discipline. What were you hoping to uncover or rescue by returning to the fundamentals?
Well, I think that, of course, we are currently living in a neoliberalized economy. And I was lucky that I began as an architect before that definitive economic regime. And that has really colored my entire perception, that shift colored my entire perception. Because since neoliberalism, every architect was almost obliged to produce exceptional buildings, create euphoric stories, claim unprovable achievements, and basically hide all the complexities and difficulties of the architecture profession. So I wanted in one go kind of explore or reveal this underbelly, kind of so to speak, and kind of reveal what kind of complexities we're really dealing with.
Do you think you succeeded in conveying this to the general public, since you have both people from your profession visiting Biennale, but also general public?
I think there's a
those ideas are clear.
I think there's a kind of interesting tendency in the kind of art world and maybe even the architectural world, which makes them pronounce the word general, as you just did, with a certain amount of implied anxiety. The general public, I have a high regard for the general public, and I honestly think that maybe the general public in certain cases is smarter than the architectural kind of public, and I think that also exactly to while we were dealing with elements that everyone knows, from the kind of amateur house builder to the architect to the builder to the untrained labor, there was a kind of basic and common awareness and experience of all those elements. So I think that also in terms of what I heard, the general public was actually ecstatic that they for once had a kind of show where they could relate to.
Thank you. Reporting from the front confronted some real-world crises: inequality, housing, participation, and now looking back, did the Biennale change the conversation? Are we still fighting the same battles?
Well, maybe yes and no. But the problem is not so much that when you go around, there's a lot of people that didn't get the memo. The majority of the built environment is so banal, mediocre, and mainly it's not just a question of quality. is reversing what is the goal and what is the tool. So if you use the built environment as a mean to just move capital and make profit, and then you look at demand and as a way to achieve that goal, well, you're not trying to use the architectural tools to improve people's quality of life. That's what should be the driver. If that shifted, I have no idea. In any case, I would say that if I had to choose today the battles, I would choose just one, which is the struggle between civilization and barbaric. So the rule of law being replaced by the law of the jungle. There is not just the organized crime and the outlaws. In Latin America,
What do you mean by this?
in Latin
dichotomy?
America,
Where do you see
70% of what's built, it's informal. It doesn't follow, it doesn't apply for building permit. It just happens. We were working in the reconstruction after a fire in Chile. It was financed by the organized crime. You go to Mexico, Peru, the second most important part of the economy is illegal land occupation. So mafias dealing with land. So that means that there, the rule of law, or let's say the frontal cortex has been replaced by a more primitive, the law of the strongest. And it's not just that the outlaws are there. I mean, some of the political elite in the world are the same bullies that, just operate outside civilization. So by far, how the built environment is able to navigate this complete different ball game, I think is by far the biggest challenge that we're facing now.
I think there's an interesting issue about the question. The Biennale is happening, as the name suggests, every 2 years. That means that it itself implies that in 2 years there's the next thing. So there is no duration to the message because the organization itself creates a new message and in a way cancels the previous one. In that sense, there are exhibitions like in Kassel, the Documenta, which happens every 5 years in a kind of much more slower rhythm. And I think that if you see all over the world a kind of incredible proliferation of biennales, it might be a kind of recommendation to increase the interval, simply because it's less effort, consumes less money, and gives the time to filter down.
I have a question for all of you, but especially for Manuela, since you have the overview. I asked about, does the general audience understand the exhibition? But how about decision makers? A lot of politicians visit these exhibitions. A lot of people who will decide on urban design of their cities or countryside or anywhere. Have you seen over the years some real consequences of people visiting Biennale, especially those that actually could do something about it?
Well, let me first of all say that having listened both Rem and Alejandro, you will understand why I spent 23 years of my working life at the Biennale completely unable to leave because each year I was jumping into a new adventure, dragging my old office behind this, more or less, sometimes more, sometimes less crazy, but super fascinating project. So it was worth every single sleepless night on site or at the office. To come to your question, Elena, I think that this is, in a way, the power of the Biennale as an international platform. The reason why I was talking about the pavilions is that this kind of soft power is a currency of incredible value because it's something that can shape the international perception, can build bridges, can even foster the diplomatic dialogue in ways that the traditional political discourse cannot. Rem was showing the image of the Korean pavilion that got the Golden Lion that year. Can you imagine South and North Korea in the same space? So there are two different aspects in terms of rulers, of politicians. Of course, each pavilion is promoted by a government. And so there is a very precise message that each government wants to send. And there are the reasons why countries want to participate can be very, very different. There are countries who want to be there to show their power, their importance, their influence. There are countries who want to be there to show that they're maybe less powerful but equally important in terms of message. There are countries who want to be there to compete or to be seen or to start to develop something else. So it's very, very different. And within the same country each year, with a change of government or change of message, things can change again. So you never have the same sort of picture, overall picture, when you visit the pavilions, regardless of the theme, which is a very interesting point, I think. The ministers, the heads of state, they visit clearly their pavilion, they bless their own national representation. But I think the most important thing is, hopefully, yes, it will make a difference for the political class, but I think the most important thing is that it makes a difference for the public, for the visitors. Because ultimately, and especially I would say in the case of architecture, architects have to respond to client. I mean, architecture is a reaction to a demand, it's an answer to a demand. And if we're not able to form and inform this demand, then of course the decisions will stay among a very close circle of decision makers. I think the importance of institutions like the Biennale, both for the art and architecture, but architecture is even more meaningful, is precisely to create, to give the tools to the public to create, to understand and to create the demand and to understand also their role. Each of us is responsible for our built environment. Each of us should feel responsible to contribute to the demand.
Thank you. Since we're almost out of time, I'm just going to ask a very quick question. It's your question about the relevance of Biennale, and it connects to what you were saying about the frequency, about its effects on public and so on. Why organize a Biennale? Especially now, have things changed? It's an old platform established basically in the 19th century. Lots of things have changed, technology, climate changes, and so on. Is it still a valid platform, or do you feel something should be changed about it? You want to begin?
I'm sorry, I don't have a very short answer, but so let me start from, again, another story. February 2024, an intentional fire burned 10,000 homes, killed 2,000 people in Chile. The same year, the same month, Viña del Mar holds this song festival. It's like Eurovision or something like that. And the debate was whether to invite a singer called Peso Pluma or not. And I was involved in the discussion that, of course, we cannot invite a person that glorifies narco culture and makes it not only desirable, but normal. And the question is the cultural battle behind. What makes narcos so powerful is that they are able to arrive faster than the state, than the rule of law. So they cover needs in a much more efficient way, but mainly they provide purpose to people, to too many people that have nothing to lose. So people that are going to die young because of violence, they will be remembered if they work as a soldier for the narco. So the deal is, if you die because you're going to die young anyhow, I will ask an artist to paint a mural for you to be remembered to a person that otherwise would have gone through life without nobody noticing. So the promise of being remembered and the epic behind through art is one of the most powerful drivers for people that are willing to risk their lives working for somebody that provides purpose, because society is no longer able to do that for the majority. For maybe for the few that have the privilege of having opportunities, yes, but for the rest not. So art, instead of being something that is done once you have solved all your basic needs is maybe, it's out of survival, the thing that has to be done in order to create a shared epic, a shared narrative that we all agree. A Biennale is one of those moments in which this view, a shared view, that is a narrative that is appealing, that is inclusive, that replaces belongings as a way to prove value. I have things. Replaced a noun being replaced by belonging, a verb. This type of cultural shift can only be done coming from cultural institutions, and being the Biennale, maybe in architecture, the most important one in the world.
Beautiful answer. Thank you. Manuela?
Well, I do think that institutions like the Biennale are still relevant. The point is how to reconceive these kind of exhibitions, because of course we live in the internet era. So this is not about showing the last building, the last project, the last artwork. The novelty is not there. The novelty is already in the web. So it is about rethinking how to convey the message, how to make it relevant, how to involve the audience. I mean, in a way, what Alejandro was saying, I think more and more multidisciplinarity and educational tools are fundamental to involve the people, to send a message, to keep this balance also between some global and local dimensions from all points of view. But definitely, you know, I think whenever there is an international platform for exchange, it is important to keep it alive, to never to sit on the existing rules. I mean, my role while I was there, from all points of view, I had my own creative moments in how to stretch the rules to make these projects possible. And sometimes it was not so easy. And an institution should evolve within its own principles and mission, of course, but it should constantly evolve. I think this is the role. And adding voices, like now we were mentioning Qatar being the last pavilion to be added in the Giardini, so in the core group of the historical part of the Biennale. It's a super important event, and a very relevant voice to bring a specific part of the world there to contribute to the dialogue. The dialogue, as long as the dialogue continues and evolves and changes, I think these kind of platforms are more than relevant.
Can I just ask one more thing? In the course of time, now that most children are glued to screens and everything is virtual and nothing is, you know, in real life happening, and I know you have lots of schools, lots of university students visiting. Have you had any feedback in terms of how is this received by the younger audiences? How is the visit to the Biennale received?
Well, you would be surprised, but I think we all experienced during COVID time, there was a proliferation of online exhibitions, online art fairs, online whatever. At the very end of the COVID time, the first Biennale that opened, that was the Architecture Biennale, was the most visited ever. I think there was a desire to go back to see things in person, to touch things, to be together in the same space, having this experience. And I think this was the ultimate evidence that the physical, the in-person experience is not replaceable. Even the personal experience together with your schoolmates, with your friends, is something that cannot be replaced. Being in front of an artwork, architecture is a bit more difficult because we know that exhibiting architecture is kind of a paradox, but there are ways to go around the issue, but it's something that no digital experience can replace.
I think that we are not in a particularly happy moment in globalization, and there is in almost every continent forces at work that advocate separation and advocate kind of more introversion and less extroversion, and basically many kind of countries are retreating in some kind of degree of isolation. So in that sense, I think the biennales are more important than ever. Because it's the only place where the plausibility, but also the excitement of being somewhere together is still demonstrated and becoming more popular.
Well, thank you very much. On that positive note, we end today's panel, and I invite you also for the afternoon panel, Forces of Resistance, Palestinian Art Today at Virginia Commonwealth University at 4:30. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation.